The whiskey-stained letter trembled in Prudence Palmer's hands as she stood at the edge of Central City, Colorado, watching the sun bleed orange across the Rocky Mountains in the summer of 1878, knowing that every person in this mining town would soon learn what she had done back in Denver. She had arrived on the afternoon stage, her belongings packed into a single worn trunk, hoping that distance might erase the scandal that had followed her like a shadow for the past 2 years. The mining town sprawled before her in a chaotic jumble of wooden buildings and muddy streets, the sound of hammers and distant laughter drifting up from the saloons below. She had hoped to disappear here, to become just another face among the prospectors and merchants, but the letter in her hand told her that her past had already begun its pursuit. The letter was from her former employer in Denver, a man whose proposition she had refused 3 years ago when she was only 19. He had not taken the rejection well, and when his wife discovered his inappropriate advances, he had twisted the story to make Prudence appear as the instigator. The scandal had cost her everything: her position as a governess, her reputation, her standing in polite society. Women crossed the street to avoid her. Mothers pulled their children away when she passed. The whispers followed her everywhere, poisonous and persistent. She had endured it for as long as she could. But when the man's influence began affecting her younger sister's prospects for marriage, Prudence had made the difficult decision to leave Denver entirely. Central City had seemed like the perfect refuge. The mining boom had drawn all sorts of people to the mountains, and she had hoped that in such a transient population, she might find anonymity. She had secured a position through correspondence as a schoolteacher, a role that required references she had carefully cultivated from the few people in Denver who still believed in her innocence. But now, holding this letter that had somehow found her even here, she realized that running might never be enough. She folded the letter carefully and tucked it into her reticule, squaring her shoulders as she picked up her trunk. The boarding house where she had arranged lodging stood 3 blocks down the main street, a respectable establishment run by a widow named Mrs. Carpenter. Prudence had paid for 2 weeks in advance, enough time to establish herself before the school term began in September. She had exactly 1 month to prove herself worthy of the position, to show the town council and the parents that she was a woman of good character and solid moral fiber. The weight of the trunk made her arms ache, but she refused to ask for help. Independence had become her armor over the past 2 years. She had learned to rely on no one but herself, to expect nothing from others except judgment and scorn. The main street was crowded with miners fresh from their shifts, their faces dark with coal dust and exhaustion. They barely glanced at her as she passed, and for that she was grateful. Anonymity felt like a blessing after the constant scrutiny of Denver society. She had nearly reached the boarding house when a commotion erupted behind her. Shouts and the thunder of hooves made her turn just in time to see a wagon careening down the street, its driver slumped over the reins, clearly unconscious or worse. The horses were panicked, their eyes rolling white with fear as they charged forward. People scattered in all directions, and Prudence found herself frozen in the middle of the street, her trunk at her feet, unable to move as the wagon bore down on her. A hand grabbed her arm with enough force to spin her completely around. She collided with something solid and warm, and then she was being pulled backward with such urgency that her feet barely touched the ground. The wagon roared past, so close that she felt the rush of air against her face. Her rescuer pulled her all the way to the wooden sidewalk before releasing her, and she stumbled against the wall of a building, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. "Are you hurt?" The voice was deep and rough, edged with concern. Prudence looked up into the face of the man who had saved her life. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes the color of creek water in shadow. His face was weathered from sun and wind, with lines around his eyes that suggested he spent most of his time outdoors. He wore the practical clothes of a working cowboy, denim trousers and a worn leather vest over a blue cotton shirt. His hat had fallen off during the rescue and lay in the dirt of the street. "I'm fine," she managed, though her voice shook. "Thank you. You saved my life." He studied her for a moment, those gray-green eyes taking in her travel-stained dress and the way her dark hair had come loose from its pins. Then he nodded once and stepped back into the street to retrieve his hat and her trunk, which had been kicked aside in the chaos. Several men had managed to stop the runaway wagon further down the street, and someone was calling for the doctor. "You are new to Central City," he said, returning with her trunk as though it weighed nothing. "It was not a question. I arrived today. I'm to be the new schoolteacher." She brushed at her skirts, trying to regain some composure. "My name is Prudence Palmer, Dawson Drake." He touched the brim of his hat in a gesture of respect. "I work at the Double D Ranch, just north of town. We supply beef to the mining camps. It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Drake, though I wish it had been under less dramatic circumstances." She managed a small smile, still shaken by how close she had come to being trampled. "Where are you headed? I'll carry your trunk." "Oh, I couldn't impose further. It's not an imposition. You have already had enough excitement for one day." There was something solid and reassuring about him, a quiet competence that made her feel safer than she had in a very long time. She gave him the address of the boarding house, and he fell into step beside her, carrying her trunk as easily as if it contained feathers rather than books and clothes. They walked in silence for a moment, and Prudence found herself acutely aware of the curious glances they were receiving from people on the street. In Denver, being seen with a strange man would have added fuel to the rumors about her character. Here, she told herself, it meant nothing. He had saved her life. It would be absurd to refuse his help out of an excess of propriety. "Have you been in Central City long?" she asked, more to fill the silence than from genuine curiosity. 5 years. Came out from Kansas after the war, found work at the ranch and stayed." His answers were economical, offering just enough information to be polite without inviting further questions. "You like it here. It suits me. The mountains are honest. You know where you stand with them." He glanced at her. "What brings a schoolteacher all the way up to the mining camps?" "Most educated women prefer the cities." The question sent a spike of anxiety through her chest. This was the moment when she would have to begin constructing her carefully maintained facade, the version of herself that omitted all the ugly truths. "I wanted a change of scenery. And I believe education is needed everywhere, not just in established cities." If he noticed the evasion, he gave no sign. They had reached the boarding house, a neat 2-story structure with fresh white paint and flower boxes in the windows. Dawson carried her trunk up the front steps and set it down gently on the porch. "Thank you again, Mr. Drake. I'm deeply in your debt." "No debt. Anyone would have done the same." He put his hat back on, adjusting it carefully. "Welcome to Central City, Miss Palmer. I hope you find it to your liking." She watched him walk away, his long stride carrying him quickly down the street until he disappeared around a corner. Then she took a deep breath and knocked on the door of the boarding house, preparing to meet Mrs. Carpenter and begin this new chapter of her carefully reconstructed life. The next 4 weeks passed in a blur of preparation. Mrs. Carpenter proved to be a kind landlady, a woman in her 50s who had lost her husband to a mining accident and now supported herself by taking in respectable lodgers. She asked few questions about Prudence's past, seemingly content to accept her at face value. The boarding house had 3 other residents, all women, including a seamstress, a nurse, and a young widow who worked as a clerk in one of the mining offices. Prudence threw herself into preparing for the school term. She visited the one-room schoolhouse that would be her domain, a simple building at the edge of town with rough-hewn benches and a pot-bellied stove for heat. She met with the town council to discuss curriculum and expectations, and she spent her evenings planning lessons and organizing the meager collection of books that constituted the school's library. She saw Dawson Drake twice during those weeks. Once, she glimpsed him across the street, leading a string of horses through town. He raised his hand in greeting, and she waved back, feeling an unexpected flutter of pleasure at being remembered. The second time, they met by chance at the general store, where she was purchasing chalk, and he was collecting supplies for the ranch. They spoke briefly about nothing important, but his presence had a calming effect on her frayed nerves. The school term began on a crisp September morning with 23 students ranging in age from 6 to 16. Most were children of miners and merchants, eager for education despite the hardships of mountain life. Prudence fell into the rhythm of teaching with relief, grateful to have a purpose that consumed her days and left little time for dwelling on the past. The children were bright and curious, starved for knowledge in a town where books were scarce and opportunities for learning even scarcer. For 3 blissful weeks, she believed she had truly escaped. And then Martha Henley arrived in Central City. Prudence was dismissing the students for the day when she saw the woman standing outside the schoolhouse, her expensive traveling costume a stark contrast to the rough surroundings. Martha had been a friend once, back in Denver, before the scandal. They had attended the same church, served on the same charity committees, shared confidences over tea in elegant parlors. But when Prudence's reputation had been destroyed, Martha had been among the first to turn away, her previous friendship evaporating like morning mist. The children streamed past Martha, laughing and calling to each other as they headed home. Prudence stood in the doorway of the schoolhouse, her heart sinking as Martha's gaze fixed on her with unmistakable recognition. "Prudence Palmer," Martha said, her voice carrying clearly in the afternoon air. "I could hardly believe it when I heard you were here. How extraordinary that a woman with your history would have the audacity to take a position educating children." Prudence felt the blood drain from her face. 2 mothers who had been waiting to collect their younger children turned at Martha's words, their expressions curious. "Martha, what brings you to Central City?" "My husband has invested in one of the mines. We are staying at the hotel for a few weeks while he conducts his business." Martha moved closer, her smile sharp as a knife. "I must say, I'm surprised the town council agreed to hire you. Do they know about your time in Denver? About what happened with Mr. Whitmore?" "Nothing happened with Mr. Whitmore. He made advances that I refused, and when his wife discovered his behavior, he lied to protect himself." Prudence kept her voice steady with effort, aware of the women listening nearby. "That's not how I heard it. Everyone in Denver knows you threw yourself at him shamelessly. Poor Mrs. Whitmore was devastated. And then you had the nerve to claim he was the one at fault." Martha's voice dripped with false sympathy. "I simply think the good people of Central City have a right to know what sort of woman is teaching their children." One of the mothers, a stern-faced woman named Mrs. Billings, approached with a frown. "Is this true, Miss Palmer? Were you involved in a scandal in Denver?" "There was a misunderstanding that was deliberately twisted into something it was not," Prudence said, fighting to keep her composure. "I have done nothing wrong." "A misunderstanding that cost you your position and your reputation," Martha interjected smoothly. "Mrs. Billings, is it? I assure you the entire city of Denver knows about Miss Palmer's behavior. She is not a fit role model for impressionable young minds. Mrs. Billings gathered her children close, her expression hardening. I will be speaking to the town council about this. We cannot have someone of questionable character teaching our children. She hurried away, her children stumbling to keep up with her rapid pace. Martha smiled triumphantly. I do hope I have not caused too much trouble for you, Prudence. But one must think of the children first. With that, she turned and walked away, leaving Prudence standing alone in front of the schoolhouse, her carefully rebuilt life crumbling around her once more. By the following morning, everyone in Central City seemed to know about her past. The whispers started as soon as she left the boarding house, following her like a cloud of gnats. Women pulled their children away when she approached. Men looked at her with speculation or contempt. When she arrived at the schoolhouse, 5 sets of parents were waiting outside with their children, announcing that they would be withdrawing them from school until the matter of her suitability was resolved. She taught that day to a half-empty classroom, the remaining students subdued and confused by the sudden tension. During the lunch break, she sat at her desk with her hands folded, trying not to cry. She had been so careful, so cautious, but it had not been enough. The past had found her anyway, and now it was destroying her future just as thoroughly as it had destroyed everything else. She was gathering her things at the end of the day when she heard boots on the wooden steps outside. She looked up, expecting another angry parent, and found Dawson Drake filling the doorway instead. He removed his hat as he entered, his expression serious. "Mr. Drake, this is unexpected." She tried to sound normal, as though her world had not just collapsed again. "I heard what happened. The whole town is talking about it." He crossed the room to stand in front of her desk. "I wanted to ask if the story is true." Prudence set down the books she had been gathering and met his eyes. "Which version of the story, the truth, or the one that makes me a villain? Your version." She took a breath, steadying herself. This was the moment she had dreaded, the moment when she would have to defend herself against accusations that could never truly be disproven. 3 years ago, I was working as a governess for a wealthy family in Denver. The man of the house, Mr. Whitmore, began making inappropriate advances. He would corner me in hallways, make comments about my appearance, suggest that I might be happier in a different sort of position. I rebuffed him repeatedly, but he became more persistent. Eventually, I went to his wife and told her what was happening, hoping she would intervene. And did she? She accused me of lying, of trying to seduce her husband for his money and position. Mr. Whitmore claimed that I had been pursuing him, that I had made advances he had rejected, and that I was now seeking revenge for his refusal. His version was believed. Mine was not. I lost my position immediately and was turned out without references or compensation. The scandal spread through Denver society, and I found myself unable to secure any respectable employment. My presence was affecting my younger sister's reputation and marriage prospects, so I left. I came here hoping for a fresh start. Dawson listened to all of this without interruption, his face impassive. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment, and Prudence braced herself for the inevitable rejection. She had told the truth, but truth rarely mattered when weighed against the word of a wealthy man and the assumptions of society. "You think I'm lying?" she asked finally, unable to bear the silence. "No." The word was simple and absolute. "I think you're telling the truth." She stared at him, momentarily speechless. "You believe me? Just like that?" "I've met men like this, Whitmore. Men who think their money and position give them the right to anything they want, and I've seen how society treats women who dare to speak out against them." He turned his hat in his hands, his expression thoughtful. Everyone has a past, Miss Palmer. Some of us have done things we regret. Some of us have had things done to us that we did not deserve. But it's not the past that defines us. It's what we choose to do with our future that matters. The kindness in his words broke something inside her. Tears spilled down her cheeks before she could stop them, months of carefully maintained composure shattering all at once. She turned away, mortified, trying to regain control. She heard him move, and then his handkerchief appeared in her line of vision, clean and neatly folded. "I'm sorry," she managed, taking the handkerchief and pressing it to her eyes. "This is mortifying. Crying when someone finally believes you is nothing to be ashamed of." His voice was gentle. "How many students did you lose today?" 5 families withdrew their children. More will follow, I'm sure. The town council is meeting tomorrow to discuss my position. I expect I'll be dismissed by the end of the week. She wiped her eyes and tried to smile. "I suppose I'll have to move on again. Though I'm running out of places to run to. Or you could stay and fight." "Fight? Against what?" "Against a scandal that has already been decided in the court of public opinion." She shook her head. "I've tried fighting, Mr. Drake. It only makes things worse." "Then maybe you have not had anyone fighting beside you." He met her eyes steadily. "I'd like to help if you'll let me." "Why would you do that? You barely know me." "I know enough. I know you saved your sister from being tainted by association. I know you came here hoping for a chance to prove yourself. I know you are a good teacher who cares about those children." He gestured toward the empty classroom. "And I know what it's like to be judged for things beyond your control." Something in the way he said those last words made her look at him more closely. There was an old pain in his eyes, carefully hidden but still visible if you knew to look for it. "What happened to you?" "That's a conversation for another time. Right now, we need to focus on keeping you in this schoolhouse." He settled his hat back on his head. "The town council meets tomorrow at 7 in the evening at the community hall. Be there, and don't back down." He left before she could protest further, his footsteps echoing on the wooden floor. Prudence stood alone in the empty schoolhouse, clutching his handkerchief, feeling a fragile seed of hope taking root despite her better judgment. The community hall was packed when Prudence arrived the next evening. It seemed the entire town had turned out for the meeting, drawn by gossip and the promise of drama. She wore her best dress, a severe gray cotton that made her look older and more serious than her 22 years. Mrs. Carpenter had insisted on accompanying her, providing moral support with her steady presence. The town council consisted of 5 men, prosperous merchants and mine owners who governed Central City with varying degrees of competence. They sat at a long table at the front of the room, looking uncomfortable with the crowd that had assembled. Prudence spotted Martha Henley in the 3rd row, her expression satisfied. Several of the parents who had withdrawn their children sat nearby, their faces set with righteous conviction. And there, standing against the back wall, was Dawson Drake. He caught her eye and nodded once, a gesture of encouragement that steadied her nerves. The council chairman, a florid man named Horace Gunderson, called the meeting to order. "We are here to discuss the matter of Miss Prudence Palmer and her fitness to serve as our schoolteacher. Several concerned citizens have brought information to our attention regarding her past conduct in Denver, and we must determine how to proceed." Mrs. Billings stood immediately. "Mr. Chairman, I think the matter is quite clear. Miss Palmer was involved in a scandal of a most inappropriate nature. She is not a suitable influence for our children and should be dismissed immediately." A murmur of agreement rippled through parts of the crowd. Martha leaned over to whisper something to the woman beside her, her smile venomous. "Does Miss Palmer have anything to say in her own defense?" Mr. Gunderson asked, though his tone suggested he considered it a mere formality. Prudence stood, her legs trembling but her voice steady. I do, Mr. Chairman. I want to be very clear about what happened in Denver. I was falsely accused of inappropriate conduct by a man whose advances I had rejected. I reported his behavior to his wife, and in retaliation, he destroyed my reputation. I came to Central City hoping for a chance to prove myself based on my abilities as a teacher, not on malicious gossip spread by people who do not know me and do not care about the truth. That's not gossip, it's fact, Martha called out from her seat. Everyone in Denver knows what you did. Everyone in Denver believes a lie told by a powerful man who wanted to protect himself from the consequences of his own misconduct. Prudence shot back, her temper finally breaking through her careful composure. I understand that my word means nothing against his. I understand that society will always believe a wealthy man over a working woman, but I ask you to judge me based on what you have seen these past weeks, not on second-hand rumors. The children seem to like her, someone said from the crowd. It was Mr. Patterson, whose twin boys were among Prudence's students. My sons have learned more in 3 weeks than they did in the previous 6 months. That's hardly the point, Mrs. Billings snapped. Her moral character is what's in question. Dawson's voice cut through the rising argument, calm and authoritative. Then perhaps we should talk about moral character. Every head in the room turned to look at him. He pushed away from the wall and moved through the crowd until he stood in the center aisle, visible to everyone. Most of you know me, he continued. I've lived here for 5 years, worked at the Double D, kept to myself. What you might not know is that I spent 3 years in prison before I came to Colorado. A shocked silence fell over the room. Prudence stared at him, her heart hammering. What was he doing? I was 20 years old, just back from the war. I got into a fight with a man who had cheated my father out of his farm. The fight got out of hand and the man ended up badly hurt. I was convicted of assault and sent to prison for 3 years. Dawson's voice remained steady, though Prudence could see the tension in his shoulders. When I got out, I had a record. I had a past. Everyone who looked at me saw a violent criminal, not a young man who had made a mistake defending his family. I drifted for 2 years, unable to find steady work, unable to build any kind of life. He turned slowly, making eye contact with people throughout the room. Then I came here, and Jacob Donnelly gave me a chance. He hired me at the ranch knowing full well about my past. He said the same thing I'm saying now. Everyone has a past. It's the future that matters. Mr. Gunderson cleared his throat uncomfortably. Mr. Drake, we appreciate your honesty, but I fail to see how your situation relates to Miss Palmer's. It relates because you are all sitting here ready to destroy this woman's future based on nothing but gossip about her past. You have seen her teach. You have seen how your children respond to her. But you are willing to throw all of that away because a woman from Denver came here spreading rumors. Dawson's gaze swept the room. I know what it's like to be judged for something you did not do, or for a mistake that does not define who you are. And I'm telling you that Miss Palmer deserves the same chance that Jacob Donnelly gave me. Judge her on what she does, not on what someone says she did. There was a long moment of silence. Then Mr. Patterson stood again. Dawson's right. My boys have never been so excited about going to school. Miss Palmer is a fine teacher, and that's what we hired her to be. I agree, said another voice. It was Mrs. Thompson, whose daughter Sarah was one of Prudence's brightest students. Sarah comes home every day full of stories about what she learned. Miss Palmer has been nothing but professional and kind. I think we are being hasty. This is ridiculous, Martha said, her voice sharp with frustration. You are all being taken in by a pretty face and a sad story. And you, Mrs. Henley, seem awfully invested in destroying someone who was once your friend. Mrs. Carpenter spoke up from beside Prudence. "Makes me wonder if maybe you have your own reasons for wanting to cause trouble." Martha's face flushed red. "How dare you?" "That's enough," Mr. Gunderson said firmly. "This meeting is getting out of hand. The council will deliberate and announce our decision tomorrow. Miss Palmer, you are dismissed." Prudence left the hall on shaking legs, Mrs. Carpenter at her side. The night air was cool against her flushed face, and she stood on the steps for a moment, trying to process everything that had just happened. Dawson had revealed something deeply personal, something that could have damaged his own standing in the community, all to help her. He emerged from the hall a few minutes later and found her waiting. "You should not have done that," she said immediately. "You should not have exposed your past for my sake. It was my choice to make." He descended the steps to stand beside her. "Jacob's been after me for years to stop hiding what happened. He says shame only has power if we let it. Maybe he's right. What if it costs you your position at the ranch? It won't. Jacob's a man of his word, and even if it did, some things are worth the risk." He looked at her in the lamplight spilling from the hall windows. "You deserve better than what this town was about to do to you." "Why do you care so much?" The question emerged before she could stop it. "You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. Maybe I see something of myself in you. Someone who made a choice that others could not understand. Someone who has been running from a past that will not let go." He smiled slightly. "Or maybe I just think you are a good person who deserves a fair chance. Does it matter?" Mrs. Carpenter cleared her throat delicately. "I'm going to head back to the boarding house. Prudence, take your time. I'll leave the door unlocked." She walked away into the darkness, her footsteps fading. Prudence and Dawson stood together in the quiet street, the sounds of argument still drifting from the community hall behind them. "Thank you," she said softly, "for believing me, for speaking up, for everything. Will you take a walk with me? There's something I'd like to show you." She hesitated only a moment before nodding. They walked through the town, past the saloons and stores, following a path that led up into the foothills. The moon was bright enough to light their way, and the air smelled of pine and approaching autumn. They did not speak, but the silence was comfortable, companionable. After about 20 minutes, they emerged onto a rocky outcrop that overlooked the entire valley. Central City spread below them, its lights twinkling in the darkness like fallen stars. Above, the Milky Way stretched across the sky in a river of light, so bright and clear that Prudence caught her breath. "I come here when I need to think," Dawson said. "It helps to remember how small our problems are in the grand scheme of things." Prudence gazed out at the view, feeling some of the tension leave her shoulders. "It's beautiful. I wanted you to see it tonight in case you decide to leave. I wanted you to see what you would be missing." He turned to face her. "I hope you'll stay, regardless of what the council decides. Central City needs people like you, people who stand up for what's right even when it's hard." "I've been running for so long," she admitted. "I'm not sure I remember how to stand and fight. Then maybe it's time to learn." He reached out and gently took her hand. The gesture was simple, but it sent warmth flooding through her. "You don't have to do it alone. That's the other thing I've learned. We're not meant to face everything by ourselves." She looked down at their joined hands, then up at his face. In the moonlight, his features were softer, the hard edges gentled by shadow. There was something in his eyes that made her heart skip, a tenderness that spoke of feelings neither of them had yet voiced. "Mr. Drake." "Dawson, please, Dawson," she smiled slightly. "I barely know you, and yet I feel like you understand me better than people I have known for years. Maybe that's because I'm not looking at you through the lens of expectations and society rules. I'm just seeing you as you are." He squeezed her hand gently. "And I like what I see." The confession hung in the air between them, charged with possibility. Prudence knew she should pull away, should maintain propriety and distance. But she was tired of propriety, tired of living her life according to rules that had never protected her. Instead, she stepped closer. "I like what I see, too," she whispered. He lifted his free hand to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing lightly across her skin. "I know this is fast. I know we should take more time. But I learned in the war and in prison that life is too short to waste on hesitation. So I'm going to be honest with you. I care about you, Prudence Palmer. I have since the moment I pulled you out of that wagon's path, and I'd like the chance to see where this could go. Even knowing that being associated with me could damage your reputation. My reputation survived 3 years in prison. I think it can handle being linked to an honest woman who had the courage to stand up against a powerful man." He smiled. "Besides, I don't care much what people think. I care what's true." She had not been kissed in 3 years, had not allowed any man close enough to even attempt it. But standing there in the moonlight with the valley spread below and the stars wheeling overhead, she found herself hoping that Dawson would kiss her. As if reading her thoughts, he leaned down slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away. She did not pull away. His lips met hers softly, tentatively, a question more than a demand. She answered by leaning into him, her free hand coming up to rest against his chest. The kiss deepened, becoming something sure and warm and right. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless. "I should probably walk you back before Mrs. Carpenter sends out a search party," Dawson said, his voice rough with emotion. They made their way back down the path, hands still linked, neither wanting to break the connection. At the door of the boarding house, he kissed her once more, brief and sweet. "Whatever the council decides tomorrow, we'll face it together," he said. "That's a promise." She watched him walk away into the night, her heart full of a strange mixture of fear and hope. For the first time in 2 years, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, her future could be brighter than her past. The next day passed with agonizing slowness. Prudence taught her reduced class, trying to focus on grammar and arithmetic, while her mind churned with anxiety about the council's decision. The students seemed to sense her distraction and were unusually subdued. At lunch, young Sarah Thompson approached her desk with a carefully folded piece of paper. "My mother told me to give you this," she said shyly. Prudence opened the note and found a brief message in neat handwriting. "Whatever happens, know that some of us believe in you. You have friends here." It was signed by Mrs. Thompson and half a dozen other names, parents of students who had apparently met that morning to draft the letter of support. The gesture brought tears to her eyes. She had been alone for so long that she had forgotten what it felt like to have people stand beside her. The council's decision was delivered at 4 o'clock by Mr. Gunderson himself, who arrived at the schoolhouse looking uncomfortable. Prudence braced herself for the worst. "Miss Palmer, the council has deliberated at length about your situation. It was not an easy decision." He cleared his throat. "However, we have decided that you will remain as Central City's schoolteacher. Your conduct here has been exemplary, and several parents spoke very highly of your teaching abilities. We see no reason to dismiss you based solely on unsubstantiated rumors from your previous location." Prudence felt her knees go weak with relief. "Thank you, Mr. Gunderson. I promise you won't regret this decision. See that we don't." His expression softened slightly. "For what it's worth, my wife was one of those who argued most strongly in your favor. She said any woman who would risk her own position to report inappropriate behavior is showing character, not lacking it. I hope she's right." After he left, Prudence sat at her desk and allowed herself to cry, this time from relief and gratitude. She had been given a second chance. The council had chosen to believe in her future rather than condemn her for her past. It felt like a miracle. That evening, Dawson came to the boarding house with a bouquet of wildflowers he had clearly picked himself. Mrs. Carpenter answered the door with a knowing smile and called Prudence down from her room. They sat together in the parlor, the flowers between them on a small table, and talked for hours. He told her more about his time in prison, about the darkness that had nearly consumed him, and the determination that had pulled him through. She told him about her sister, about the pain of leaving Denver, about the nightmares she still had where Mr. Whitmore's accusations followed her everywhere. "You ever wish you could go back and change what happened?" she asked. "Every day," he admitted. "But I've learned that regret is like carrying a stone in your pocket. It weighs you down but serves no purpose. All we can do is move forward and try to be better than we were." Over the following weeks, they fell into a pattern. Dawson would ride into town 3 times a week after his work at the ranch, and they would walk together through Central City or up into the hills. They talked about everything and nothing, their conversations ranging from the profound to the mundane. He told her about his dreams of one day owning his own ranch, of building something lasting that could not be taken away. She confessed her love of poetry and her secret ambition to perhaps write a book one day, though she laughed at herself for the pretension of it. "It's not pretentious," he said seriously. "You have stories to tell, stories that matter." The town gradually accepted their courtship. Some of the older women clucked their tongues about the speed of the relationship, but most people seemed to view it as romantic. The reformed convict and the scandal-tainted schoolteacher, finding love together in the mountains. It was the sort of story that appealed to frontier sensibilities. Martha Henley left Central City after 2 weeks, her husband's business concluded. Before she departed, she made one final attempt to poison opinion against Prudence, spreading rumors that Prudence and Dawson were engaged in improper conduct. The rumors gained no traction. Prudence's character had been proven through her work, and Dawson's defense of her had earned him respect throughout the town. Martha's malice seemed petty by comparison, and she left in defeat. Winter came early to the mountains that year. By November, snow was piling high in the passes, and Central City settled into the quiet rhythm of cold weather life. The schoolhouse was harder to heat, and Prudence often taught with a shawl wrapped around her shoulders. Dawson insisted on walking her home every evening, concerned about her safety on the icy streets. It was during one of these walks, with snow falling softly around them and their breath misting in the frigid air, that he asked her to marry him. There was no grand gesture, no carefully planned speech. They were simply walking, their hands linked inside his coat pocket for warmth, when he stopped and turned to face her. "I love you, Prudence Palmer. I love your strength and your kindness, and the way you never give up even when everything seems impossible. I love how you make me want to be a better man. I want to spend the rest of my life with you if you'll have me." She looked up at him, this man who had changed her life so completely. "I love you too, Dawson Drake. Yes, I'll marry you." He kissed her there in the falling snow, heedless of the cold or the people who might be watching from their windows. When they finally broke apart, both were laughing with pure joy. They were married in the spring of 1879, in a small ceremony at the church with Mrs. Carpenter and Jacob Donnelly standing as witnesses. Prudence wore a simple blue dress that Mrs. Thompson and the other mothers had helped her sew. Dawson wore his best suit, bought specially for the occasion. The entire town turned out for the celebration afterward, a potluck dinner held in the community hall with music and dancing that lasted until dawn. Jacob gave them a generous wedding gift, a small parcel of land adjoining the Double D Ranch, along with a promise of help building a house. "Every man needs something of his own," he said gruffly, clapping Dawson on the shoulder. "You have more than earned this." They spent the summer building their home, a sturdy cabin with 2 bedrooms and a large kitchen. Prudence continued teaching through the end of the school year, but she gave notice that she would not return in the fall. She was pregnant by then, and she wanted to focus on preparing for motherhood. The town council was sorry to see her go but understood her decision. They hired a new teacher, a young man from Denver who approached Prudence nervously to ask for advice about managing the sometimes rowdy students. Their son was born in January of 1880, during a fierce snowstorm that trapped them in the cabin for 3 days. Dawson delivered the baby himself with hands that shook despite his steady voice, cutting the cord and wrapping his son in warm blankets while Prudence cried with exhaustion and joy. They named him Thomas, after Dawson's father. Life settled into a new rhythm. Dawson worked the land, slowly building a herd of cattle with Jacob's help and guidance. Prudence cared for Thomas and managed their household, finding satisfaction in the simple domestic routines she had once scorned. But she also continued reading and learning, ordering books from Denver and San Francisco, feeding her mind even as her hands were busy with motherhood. When Thomas was 2, they had a daughter, Elizabeth, a red-faced, screaming bundle who seemed determined to make her presence known from the first moment. 2 years after that came another son, James, quiet and thoughtful even as an infant. Their family grew, and with it their home expanded, additional rooms added as needed. The ranch prospered. Dawson proved to have an instinct for cattle breeding and land management that impressed even the experienced ranchers in the area. By 1885, the Drake Ranch was one of the most successful operations in the region, supplying beef not just to Central City, but to mining camps throughout the Rockies. Prudence found her own path back to teaching, though not in a traditional classroom. She started a small lending library in their home, opening it to families throughout the area every Saturday. Children and adults alike would come to borrow books, and often they would stay to discuss what they had read. It became an informal sort of education, driven by curiosity rather than curriculum, and it flourished in ways that surprised everyone. They sometimes talked about the past, usually late at night when the children were asleep, and they sat together by the fire. The pain had dulled over the years, becoming more memory than lived experience. Prudence heard occasionally about people from Denver, always third-hand. Mrs. Whitmore had died in 1882, and Mr. Whitmore had remarried within 6 months. The scandal that had once consumed Prudence's entire world had been forgotten by everyone, except those who had lived through it. "Do you ever regret how things turned out?" Dawson asked her once, on their 10th anniversary. They were sitting on the porch of their home, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple. "Not for a single moment," she said honestly. "If Mr. Whitmore had not lied, if Denver had believed me, I would never have come to Central City. I would never have met you. Our children would not exist. How could I regret any of that? I used to be so angry about what happened to me," he admitted. "The fight, the prison time, all of it. But if I had not gone through that, I would not have learned what I needed to learn. I would not have become the man I needed to be to deserve you." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "I think we both became who we needed to be. The past shaped us, but it did not define us. We did that ourselves." Their daughter Elizabeth, 15 years old and already showing signs of her mother's determination, came out onto the porch. "Father, James let the chickens out again. They are everywhere." Dawson sighed and stood. "That boy and those chickens. I swear he does it on purpose just to see them run." He dropped a kiss on Prudence's head. "I will round them up. Again." Prudence watched him go, Elizabeth trailing after him with advice about how to properly secure the chicken coop. Thomas appeared from the barn, covered in hay and grinning. At 18, he was already taller than his father and was planning to leave in the fall to study agricultural science in Denver. The idea of her son going to the city that had once rejected her gave Prudence a strange feeling, but she had encouraged his ambitions. The past was past. Denver was just a place now, no more significant than any other. James, at 14, was the dreamer of the family. He appeared from the house with a book tucked under his arm, presumably to escape the chaos of chicken catching. He sat beside his mother on the porch, opening the book without a word. They sat in companionable silence, the sounds of Dawson and Elizabeth's chicken-wrangling efforts drifting across the yard. "Mother," James said after a while, not looking up from his book, "did you always want to be a teacher?" "I wanted to be useful," she said, considering the question. "I wanted to matter in some way. Teaching was a way to do that. Do you miss it?" "Sometimes. But I found other ways to matter. Your father and you children, the library, this life we have built. It's different from what I imagined, but it's good. Better than good." He nodded, processing this. "Sarah Thompson says you are the bravest person she knows. She says you stood up to the entire town when they wanted to send you away." Prudence smiled at the mention of Sarah, now a young woman training to be a nurse. "I had help. Your father, Mrs. Carpenter, people like Sarah's mother. I could not have done it alone, but you did not run away." "I almost did. I wanted to. But your father reminded me that everyone has a past and that it's the future that matters. He taught me that running does not solve anything. You have to stand and face things even when it's terrifying." James looked at her seriously, his young face so earnest. "I will remember that." By the time the sun had set completely and the stars were emerging in the darkening sky, Dawson had successfully corralled the chickens and returned to the porch. Elizabeth had gone to help her brother Thomas with evening chores. James had been called in to set the table for dinner. Prudence and Dawson sat together in the twilight, hands linked, watching their world settle into night. "Happy?" he asked, a question he posed regularly, as if checking that she had no regrets. "Deeply, completely happy," she answered, as she always did. "Thank you for giving me a future worth having. You gave yourself that future. I just had the good sense to be part of it." They sat until the cold drove them inside, to the warm kitchen where their children were laying out dinner and arguing good-naturedly about whose turn it was to wash dishes. The house smelled of bread and stew, of wood smoke and family. Prudence looked around at this life they had built from the ashes of their painful pasts and felt nothing but gratitude. The years continued to pass, each one building on the last. Thomas went to Denver for his studies and returned 4 years later with a degree and a wife, a practical young woman named Catherine, who fit seamlessly into the Drake family. They built a house on the far end of the property and started their own branch of the ranch. Elizabeth pursued her education as well, becoming a teacher like her mother, and eventually taking over the school in Central City when the position became available. James, the dreamer, surprised everyone by becoming a skilled carpenter, creating beautiful furniture that was sought after throughout the region. Prudence and Dawson became grandparents, then grandparents again and again. Their home was always full of children and noise and life. They grew older together, silver threading through their hair, lines deepening around their eyes. But their love remained constant, the foundation on which everything else was built. On their 30th anniversary, their children threw them a party that brought together people from all over the territory. Former students came to pay their respects to Prudence. Ranchers who had worked with Dawson came to share stories and laughter. The celebration lasted 2 days, And through it all, Prudence kept finding herself watching Dawson across the crowd, catching his eye and sharing a smile that spoke of 3 decades of partnership and love. When the last guest had finally left and they were alone in their home, she sat beside him on the porch where they had spent so many evenings. The mountains were dark silhouettes against the star-filled sky. An owl called somewhere in the distance. "Do you remember the night you brought me up to that overlook?" she asked. "After the town meeting. Every detail. You were so scared, but you were trying not to show it, and I knew even then that I was falling in love with you. You told me everyone has a past and that it's the future that matters. Those words changed my life. They were true then, and they are true now." He took her hand, his grip still strong despite the arthritis that had begun to stiffen his joints. "We both had pasts that could have destroyed us. But we chose to build a future instead, and look at what we have created." She thought about it all. The children and grandchildren, the ranch, the library that had grown into a proper building in town, the lives they had touched, the community they had helped build, the love that had sustained them through hard times and good times alike. It was more than she had ever dreamed possible during those dark days in Denver when she thought her life was over. "I would not change a single thing," she said. "Not one moment, not one choice. It all led here, to this life with you, and that makes even the painful parts worthwhile." They sat together as they had done countless times before, 2 people who had been broken by their pasts and had found healing in each other. The future stretched ahead of them, unknown and precious. They faced it hand in hand as they always had, as they always would. When they were both in their 70s, Dawson fell ill during a harsh winter. The doctor could do little but make him comfortable. Prudence sat beside his bed for 3 days, holding his hand, telling him stories about their life together. Their children and grandchildren came to say goodbye, filling the house with love even as sorrow pressed down on all of them. "I'm not afraid," Dawson told her on the last night, his voice weak but steady. "I have had a good life, a life full of love and purpose. That is more than most people get. Don't leave me," she whispered, though she knew it was a selfish request. She could see the pain in his eyes, the exhaustion. "You will be fine. You are the strongest person I have ever known." He smiled slightly. "Remember what I told you all those years ago. It's the future that matters. Live your future, Prudence. Live it fully, even without me beside you." He died just before dawn, slipping away peacefully with her hand in his. Prudence sat beside him as the sun rose, painting the mountains in shades of gold, and said goodbye to the man who had saved her in every way that mattered. She lived 7 more years after Dawson's death, years filled with grandchildren and great-grandchildren, with her lending library and her quiet routines. She never remarried. The love she had shared with Dawson was complete in itself, needing no sequel. She spent her final years writing down their story, wanting future generations to know about the man who had believed in second chances and the woman who had learned to believe in herself. Prudence Palmer Drake died peacefully in her sleep in the spring of 1917, at the age of 81. She was buried beside Dawson on a hillside overlooking their ranch, with a headstone that bore a simple inscription. She lived her future. It was what Dawson would have wanted, and it was the truth. She had taken the broken pieces of her past and built them into a life of purpose and love and profound happiness. Her children found the manuscript she had been working on, the story of her life with their father. Elizabeth edited it and arranged for publication, wanting the world to know about the courage it takes to face down the past and claim a future worth having. The book was a modest success, but more importantly, it preserved the story of 2 people who had refused to let their pasts define them. Generations later, their descendants still gathered at the ranch for reunions, telling stories about Prudence and Dawson, keeping their memory alive. The lending library in Central City was eventually named in Prudence's honor, a fitting tribute to a woman who believed in the power of knowledge and second chances. The Drake Ranch continued to prosper under the management of Thomas's descendants, a lasting legacy of one man's determination to build something meaningful. The story of Prudence and Dawson became part of the folklore of Central City, told to children as an example of love and courage and the power of believing in redemption. They had both carried the weight of pasts they could not change, but they had chosen to focus on building a future together. In doing so, they had created something beautiful and enduring, a love that transcended scandal and judgment and the cruel assessments of society. They had proven that everyone deserves a second chance, and that it is never too late to build the life you were meant to have. Their story reminded people that the past, no matter how painful, does not have to dictate the future. With courage and love and the support of people who believe in you, anything is possible.